Hello and welcome back to the Genealogy Radio Show, the show that is keeping you in the loop. We are out from Radio Corcabashkin in the beautiful Kilkee, and our show is repeated on a Sunday as well as uploaded as a podcast. So today we are going to introduce you to a brand new topic, mapping throughout time with a focus on Ordnance Survey mapping in Ireland. So I'm going to hand you over now to Chloe to tell us a bit about early mapping in Ireland.
Thank you, Aoibh. So the earliest known map of Ireland was written around 1400 AD in Ptolemy's Geographia, or known as Geography or Cosmographia. This book was a thorough discussion on maps and geographic knowledge of the Greco-Roman world. Ptolemy was a mathematician, astronomer, astrologer, geographer, and music theorist from the Roman Empire, born and raised in Roman Egypt. He had never visited Ireland, but based his drawings on military, trader, and traveler reports and his own mathematical calculations. If you look at a map, the shape of Ireland was surprisingly accurate for this time period, given the creation process, time period involved, and a limited contact with Ireland by the Greeks and Romans. Known as Hibernia, Ireland was actually not colonized by the Romans, but was described as a small country in comparison to Britain, which was a colony of the Romans, excluding Scotland, but was larger than the islands of the Mediterranean. In soil and climate and in the character and civilization of its inhabited, it's much like Britain. The maps based on Ptolemy's writing were later created in the 15th and 16th century. The most important period of Irish history was the Irish plantations. In 1558, Ireland was partitioned politically and socially into English and Gaelic parts. The Crown government of Dublin intended to pacify and Anglicize the country under English rule and incorporate the native ruling classes into English aristocracy. The government intended to develop Ireland as a peaceful and reliable possession without risk of rebellion or foreign invasion. Wherever the policies surrounding Regent failed, land was confiscated from the Gaelic, Irish, and English plantations were established. To this end, two forms of plantation were adopted in the second half of the 16th century. The first of this was the exemplary plantation, in which small colonies of English would provide model farming communities that the Irish would emulate and be taxed for. Irish counties came into existence in two different phases. Previously, in areas where Norman English influence was strongest, counties were introduced as administration divisions between 169 and 1300, in a process known as shearing. Counties Dublin, Louth, Meath, Wexford, Carlow, Kilkenny, Kildare, Waterford, Cork, Kerry, Tipperary, Limerick, and Roscommon were created in this period. The remainder of Ireland was shired during the Tudor reconquest of Ireland between 1534 and 1603. The last county to be created was County Wicklow in 1606. The first such scheme was the plantation of Kings County, now known as Offaly, and Queen's County, now known as Laois, in 1556, naming them after the new Catholic monarchs Philip and Mary I, respectively. New county towns were named Phillipstown, now Dingaan, and Maryborough, now Portlaoise. An act was passed whereby the King and Queen Majesties and the heirs and successors of the Queen be entitled to the counties of Leix, Dewmarg, Erie, Glenmurray, and Offaly, and for making the same counties shire grounds. This plantation initiated the colonial settlement patterns for extending English control in hostile regions. The Down Survey of Ireland was taken in the years 1656 to 1658 by William Petty, a Surgeon General of the English Army, following the Cromwellian conquest of Ireland. The survey was the first ever detailed land survey on a national scale anywhere in the world. Petty published maps at a scale of 40 pushes to 1 inch, which in modern equivalent is 1 to 50,000, with maps created on a country, county, barony, and parish scale. The survey sought to measure all the lands to be fortified by the Catholic Irish in order to facilitate its redistribution to merchant adventurers and English soldiers. The survey was apparently called the Down Survey by Petty, either because the results were set down in maps or because the surveyors made use of Gunter's change, which had to be laid down with every measurement. After these maps were completed, they were housed in the Surveyor General's office in Dublin. These maps and accompanying textual descriptions were bound into volumes and were available to public consultation until destruction of a large amount of the material in an accidental fire in 1711. The survey only survived in its entirety in 10 counties, were completely destroyed for 4 counties, and the remaining counties had either a few burnt pages or at least a complete volume. These were later destroyed during the Custom House fire in 1922 during the Irish Civil War. There were copies made for those down survey maps surviving post 1711 and prior to the final destructions in 1922. These copies can be viewed in dozens of libraries and archives throughout Ireland, Britain, and in the National Library in France. Trinity College has an online database called the Down Survey Project, which has brought together all the surviving copies of the original maps, digitized them, and made them available as a public online resource.
Thank you, Chloe. So a rich history there of early mapping in Ireland and some really important resources there as well. So delving further into the topic, Cian, could you explain to us what exactly the Ordnance Surveys are and a little bit on their history?
Sure. The Ordnance Survey of Ireland was established in 1824, while Ireland was a part of the United Kingdom of Britain and Ireland under the direction of Major General Thomas Colby. Originally a part of the British Army under the Ministry of Defence, the Ordnance Survey of Ireland was created to survey the entire island for land taxation purposes. The scale of the original survey, completed in 1846, was 6 inches to 1 mile and included every detail of Ireland down to the townlands. The maps were finally published in 1846. They covered almost the entire country, include details of the smallest civil division of the townland. Thus, Ireland became the first country in the world to be entirely mapped at such a detailed scale. The Ordnance Survey office was based in Mountjoy House in Phoenix Park, Dublin. Mountjoy House was originally built in 1724. It had housed the mounted escort of the Lord Lieutenant, who resided in a nearby vice-regal lodge, now Ars Nuptiron. The office later became a state body under the Ordnance Survey Act 2001. Under this act, Ordnance Survey Ireland continued its mainstream public service function of creating and maintaining the definitive mapping records of the state, and also assumed a commercial function assigned to it under the act of developing its commercial business and sales revenues. The office continued to operate as an agency of the British Ministry of Defence for the next century until 1924, the establishment of the new Irish Free State, when responsibility for it was transferred to Irish Government's Department of Finance. All staff employed by the Ordnance Survey Office were recruited through military channels until the 1970s, when the first civilian employees were recruited.
Thank you, Cian. So, Jack, could you tell us a bit about the Ordnance Survey Memoirs and their value as a source?
Sure, no problem. So, alongside the Ordnance Survey maps, a compilation of manuscripts was also compiled in 1830 called the Ordnance Survey Memoirs. These memoirs were a topography, which topography means study of the land surface. Basically, these memoirs were meant to be an accompanying document alongside the Ordnance Survey maps, with the memoirs containing topographical details that were unable to be conveyed in the Ordnance Survey maps. So these memoirs were also contained information on population, economy, and society, and as well as recording features of antiquarian interest. And so in regards to society, these memoirs contained information on many aspects of the lives of the inhabitants, such as health, education, housing, food, dress, amusements, and customs. In the OS memoirs, it was compiled of comments and drawings. So these memoirs were scrapped in 1840 because it was deemed to be too expensive and they lost funding. And because of this, most of the information compiled were in the north of Ireland, with particularly Ulster being the main province that got the work done. So the counties that actually have memoirs written on them are Antrim, Cavan, Donegal, Down, Fermanagh, Derry or Londonderry, Leitrim, Louth, Monaghan, Sligo, and Tyrone. But within these ones, Cavan, Monaghan, Leitrim, Louth, and Sligo have much less information and only on certain parishes within it. So why was it called Memoirs? It was called Memoirs after the French words, and excuse me for the pronunciation, are des memoirs, meaning a memory aid, a reminder or of memorandum, or as it was saying in this book that I saw, a report. I'll pass it back to you, Eve.
Thank you so much for that, Jack. So we've had a look at the maps and the history of them in Ireland, but now we want to have a look at what their place is in genealogy. Victor, could you tell us a bit about how we can use map sources for family history?
Of course. So there are many different ways we can use map sources for family history. For one, you can use them to confirm boundaries. So did your ancestors live where you think they did? Maybe not if you're looking at a residence on a modern map. Using map sources can be very helpful in solidifying where your ancestors lived and if they lived in the same places you think they did. As Robert Davis, professor of genealogy and history at Wallace State College, put it, modern maps hide a lot of historical secrets. Other kinds of boundary changes may affect genealogist research too. Local records may have been kept within specific districts, which may be mapped out on town and county geology websites. A town may be part of a particular county one year and be part of another the next, as county boundaries could be redrawn or renamed or simply abolished due to many different reasons. And researchers can use maps to work out which county a town was in at a given point in time. Records of interest to genealogists, such as birth, marriage, and death records, or wills and deeds, for instance, are often kept at a county level. To find those records, it helps if one knows where and in what jurisdiction your ancestors' life events occurred. When searching for our ancestors in a particular place, researchers have to be certain they have the right location. Another way that maps can be used is to survey the neighborhood. Whether your family lived in a city or the countryside, maps and aerial images can teach you a lot about their daily lives. How did the natural landscape help or hinder their lives? How far away was their work or school perhaps? Were they nestled with or were they isolated from their neighbors? Maps such as topographic maps can help you image even out your ancestors' front door and how arduous it was to get around. Topographic maps can show land elevation, waterways, and even man-made landmarks. A different kind of map, demographic maps, can show distribution and changes in population, agriculture, housing, race, and ethnicity, and more. Not only will these maps give a glimpse into your ancestors' changing world, but they can also provide clues to migration, economic status, and more. Regional histories often indicate whether folks mostly traveled by road, river, sea, canal, or rail in that time and place. The counties of birth of a family's children can help you follow where they moved. When you learn a migration route, you may discover records generated along the path. These are like documentary breadcrumbs. You can also use it to plot your family property lines. So mapping an old piece of your family's land or even an entire neighborhood over time can help solve geological problems and often open up possibilities. Sometimes you can visit that place today. Maybe you'll find some chimney rocks or family graves or even an old house if nobody tore it down, as Robert Davis put it. Or of course you might find that it's now a parking lot. But I'll hand you back to Eve anyways, and there are just some of the facts that you can, on how you can use maps to search your family history.
Thank you so much, Victor. So we had a look at family history there and how the maps can fit in this scenario. But Sarah, could you delve more into genealogy research and maybe the role of Ordnance Surveys in that?
Of course. The first complete topographical survey of any country to be fixed at a large scale and specification was at a scale of 6 inches to 1 mile in Ireland. Although established in 1824, it took almost 10 years of preparation before the real work of detailed mapping began in 1834. Initially conceived and planned as a townland boundary map, it soon went way beyond that in its recording of field boundaries, rivers, dwellings, and all relevant features on the landscape. Information for each townland was collected and written into the name book under 5 headings. The received name, the name finally adopted for the townland and one place onto the 6-inch Ordnance Survey map in 1837. The orthography section of the name books provide the various spellings for each townland or place, and the authority section gives the source from which these variations were derived. This was a controversial part of the survey, especially in Irish-speaking areas of Ireland. Thomas Lackram, the head of Ordnance Survey, and John O'Donovan had a clear policy when it came to the variant spellings and meaning of Irish place names, which was to adopt the version which came the closest to the original Irish form of the name. A campaign to update the maps in the 1850s, but before it was complete, it was deemed inadequate to the needs of the time and therefore necessary to embark on even more ambitious undertaking to map the country at a scale of 25-inch to 1 mile. This survey began in 1893 and finished in 1913, and this increase in scale allowed more detail to be captured. The significance of this can be seen particularly in towns where divisions between properties can be seen. For a genealogist, the timing of these two original surveys is important. The original 6th survey, 1838 to 43, was completed just before the Great Famine. This means we have a full and accurate picture of what the landscape looked like in terms of roads, townlands, field boundaries, and dwelling houses at a moment in Irish history when the population was at its highest. The 25-inch series coincided with the census of 1901 and 1911. This means that we have at our disposal a unique picture of the country at the same time as of the official written record. Even more beneficial, key search fields in the census are also recorded and searchable on the Ordnance Survey mapping website.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. So today we have looked at Ordnance Survey maps. We've looked into early mapping in Ireland and important sources like the Ordnance Survey Memoirs. I hope that you can see from our show today the importance of the Ordnance Surveys, especially in terms of genealogy and family research. And I wanted to thank all of our hosts today for an excellent show. This show will air out from Radio Corkabashkin in Kilkee, and it'll be repeated on Sunday, as well as being posted later as a podcast. So if you miss us, make sure to have a look at that. This is the Genealogy Radio Show, the show that is keeping you in the loop.